This release of RSpec has some wonderful new features. We're going to start out looking at our beloved Albireo double. This is the A and B double. This is an image from Torsten Hansen. Thank you, Torsten. Now we can move these orange lines together by just clicking between the two and dragging. Or if that's too small a target, just click anywhere while you're holding the Shift key down and you can drag them together. So let's bracket in the dimmer of these two, which is Albireo B, which happens to be a type B8 star. Over on the right, we can see several hydrogen absorption lines, and that we've already calibrated it in angstroms. That's not the topic of this video. Now, just to remind ourselves, let's look at what this star looks like from a professional spectrum. Here it's a type B8, so there we go. We'll click on it here. And now we can see the curves are somewhat similar, but here in the ultraviolet and blue, the professional spectrum keeps going up and ours drops. And of course, that's because the professional spectrum has been corrected for the loss in sensitivity that most cameras have as we get down into the blue and ultraviolet end of the spectrum. And you can do a similar instrument response correction on your system using the procedures outlined in a previous video in RSpec. Over here on the site, just as a reminder, you can click on videos over here if you haven't already done that to watch this video, and then scroll down. And down here is the instrument response calibration video that you'd look at. And there's a PDF under this menu option which will list the specific steps that are in that video. Once you've created that instrument response file for your equipment, you can apply it to any star type with just one click using this new feature. Click on this button, then fill in the name of your instrument response file here, and then just click Apply. Over on the right here now, we can see that our curve has the same general shape in the visible region as the professional curve because we've now corrected it to take into account our equipment's nonlinearity. Now let's drag the orange boxes around Albireo A. So over on the right, we can see the uncorrected curve. And now when I click on Apply, we'll see the corrected curve. Now let's close the reference lines to make it a little clearer. Albireo A is a type K star. So we can see very clearly that its spectral energy distribution really has a lot more energy over in the red end. This is really remarkable how easy it is to get the approximate temperature of a star. Now I'm going to click on this Correct All in real time. So now when I bracket in a star, maybe I'm doing a sky survey, immediately on the right we can see the temperature of the star. So now we can even do this in real-time video. This is the original video from Torsten. And it's jumping around because our seeing is changing. But as I drag my capture lines between the stars, on the right, we can see the temperature changes reflected in the shape of the curve. We can even enhance this screen if you're doing outreach or you're in education. Let's turn on the fill and get our fill of colors here. Now we can see again on the right very clearly in a captivating and engaging way, the colors reflect the temperature of the star. Oh, and by the way, if you want to experiment yourself with this feature using the same files you just saw me use, go to our site and then select Download. And then on the Download page, click on the standard download link you've probably used in the past. Now, if you scroll down to the bottom, down here, you'll see where you can download those images. Now, this next feature is a little bit more esoteric. On the left, we have a spectrum of a star in Orion. You can see it's a little tough to see. So first thing, let's bring up our histogram. Now, a couple things on the histogram screen here. If you're going to be dragging on a large image, sometimes turning off Live Update makes it much faster. Also, notice these new buttons here to single step through the adjustment. Also, we can turn on the entire image rather than just applying the histogram between the orange lines. But be careful of that because that can really slow down the performance of the system. Speaking of performance, the system is 3 or 4 times faster, which is really significant on these large 32-bit images. Now here I'm going to rotate, and again I have Live Update turned off to get that image horizontal. Ideally, of course, it would be horizontal because the grating was mounted exactly horizontally. So let's pop open the zoom window. And I use my mouse roller wheel to zoom in and left mouse button to move around. And I've already adjusted the orange lines so that they're in a good position for me to demonstrate this new feature. If we look up in the graphing area, that's the data we're interested in right there. But look how much noise there is. This image was taken in a light polluted environment near Boston. So this line here is very high up off of black. That's essentially the background noise. The software's always had this feature here to subtract the background, and in this case I'm going to subtract the 10 rows above. Now this is a median as selected on the options screen. Now that we've turned that checkbox on, let's go over here and we can see we've subtracted out all that background sky glow. Let's zoom in with our mouse. That looks pretty good. Oh, wait a second, what's that dip? You've discovered something, you're going to be famous. Maybe not exactly. See down here, see that star? That's in the region that's 10 rows above our data that we used as our averaging area for the background. So we introduced that dip by selecting data from that background area. Now if I put a check mark here and subtract some rows from the bottom, that dip goes away on the right. We can turn that check mark off on the left and see the dip come back again. So we've introduced that artifact into our data by our processing. Now if you have a crowded star field, this could be a big problem. This new feature, Custom Region, allows you to select areas that aren't immediately adjacent to the orange sampling box. Now the next question is, how do you move those blue and green sampling areas? Well, you can see this little panel up here. You select which colored pair of lines you want to be moving, and then you use the mouse as you always have. So now I can just click and drag into an area that doesn't have any intervening stars. Once I've done that, our profile graph on the right has the same correction done, but it doesn't have that interfering star subtracting or changing our data in any way. So this is a tool that you use when you're digging deep into the data and you have a crowded star field and you need additional areas besides those immediately adjacent to your data to use as a subtractor. So I wanted to show you two more quick things. First of all, that graph, it's pretty boring, isn't it? It's going to be tough convincing your spouse that there's anything interesting in that, isn't it? So, but a lot depends on how we zoom. If we zoom in like this, now the data begins to take on some visual interest and we can begin to see some wide absorption bands of the sort that you'd see on a type M star, for example. In fact, I probably should have been zoomed this way when I showed you the feature, because watch how significant that artifact is from that adjacent star when we're zoomed in at this level. So there's one more thing I wanted to show you while we're looking at this feature. I'm going to zoom out with a double click and then left click to zoom in. Because look at that big peak there. Now that's significant. That's surely going to win us a Nobel Prize, right? Well, as is unfortunately often the case, that's also an artifact of our processing. To see more clearly what's going on, I'm going to change the histogram a little. Now it's off your screen so you can't quite see me doing it, but up in the image you can see what I did. Now remember, we rotated this image. So this area here, there's no data. So when we're subtracting a background area, and the background area is more or less off screen because we rotated, we're going to introduce artifacts like this. And this is something that you'll just crop away when you're processing your image downstream, but it can be a surprise when you first see it. Okay, so let's see about that delete. Let's shut down the zoom window. We don't need that anymore. And this region in here is the area that we really would like to crop away. Now there's a couple different ways to crop in the software. Let's first turn on our measure lines so we can do them on this screen. And we'll drag and bracket the area that we want to delete, like that. Now when I click on crop, the software is going to ask me to confirm the cropping. Now the new feature is if we hold the shift key down, it doesn't ask for a confirmation. It just does it. So now that region has been cropped away. Now there's a second way to crop, and there's some changes on that screen too, here under Edit Points. On this screen, first of all, there's this new checkbox which will allow you to crop the reference profile at the same time. And here, let's crop away all the points below 4,500. Click Delete, and those are gone. So now we'll double click. Oh, now I see what's going on. I wondered why these wavelengths here didn't disappear when I did my cropping the first time around. It's because there was some additional data to the right off screen. So this is a good example of why cropping on this area left some area to the right. It's a good example of how to use the points above, say like above 9,500. That way we're sure we get all of the points. There we go. Now we've cropped away those areas. So now, of course, when we zoom in, the data begins to look a little bit more interesting. There's not a lot of data over on the realms at either end. Now, for the rest of this video, instead of this fits image here, I'm just going to load our standard Vega image that we've been seeing across all the videos for more than 4 years now. I'm going to rotate it into place, turn the histogram off so that we get something that's a little more visually interesting. There we go. Turn our custom region off. Finally, double click, there's our data. So on the calibrate screen here, you've always been able to click to transfer a pixel value over to the left, but now that value will come over with a decimal point and a fraction amount to the right. So again, that may be more precision than you generally need, but it's precision that's available if it makes sense for the project that you're working on. Here on the appearance screen, under labels, the same thing. These wavelengths can now be decimals. So now we have a 1209.7. So again, that's important with higher resolution spectroscopy, and some of our solar observers also have been asking for that. Let's open the calibrate screen once more and click reset. So now we're in pixels here. There's a nice shortcut. If you hold the shift key down and click calibrate, the software will take the most recently saved 2-point calibration and apply it automatically. That just makes it easier if you're going in and out of the program a lot and you really don't want to go through the process of clicking the load button or reload button to load a calibration that you've done previously. Here on the options screen, we've added another label that you can put on any exported bitmap or JPEG or PNG file. Here I've put my name, and we can also control where it's located, just like the logo location. Now that we've done that, when we do an export or a copy to the clipboard, we'll jump into Microsoft Word here and I'll paste. And now there you can see that label. And that can be, of course, your name or any other label, your observatory identifier, however you want to label images that you export. But you might as well get credit for what you're doing. Now here on the rotate screen, two things. First of all, we've made it so you can resize it vertically, which gives you a little bit easier a dragging of that slider when you're trying to get exact rotations. We've also added this checkbox so that you get 2 decimals instead of 1. So now you can rotate to the 5/100ths of a degree if that's something that you're interested in doing. Okay, so let's close down the rotate screen and go back to the calibrate screen, to the nonlinear tab this time. This region here lets you save and then specify a particular nonlinear calibration to be used whenever you start the program up. If you're using a slit spectrometer and you have the same calibration every time, this will allow you, when the program starts, to load that calibration. Now, of course, you'd want to confirm that it's still accurate to what your setup is, but it gives you a great starting place. This release of RSpec has some technical changes internally that allow other software programs to control RSpec. A good example of how this capability is being used is the SPICE remote telescope at the University of Western Australia. Their team has added the capability to the remote telescope so that the RSpec software can be controlled remotely by students. The Spirit program there is accessible by high school students of all different ages. We're excited about this kind of program because it exposes real-time spectroscopy to the students. So those are the new features in the program. I hope you're pleased with what you see, and I want to thank you all for your support and for joining me in this exciting adventure into spectroscopy.